I'm so glad to see you. So happy to
I know
talk
it's
to you
lovely to
again.
see you too. God,
How is
it goes on and on, doesn't it?
Yes, we're just getting used to it and used to it and used to it.
I mean, I don't mind it so much because, you know, if you're a writer, what else are you doing but sitting at home and writing? But I don't know.
Yeah.
And then we had a few weeks where we were sort of okay to go out. And then everybody said, oh, let's have dinner, let's do this, let's do that. And I was like, no, it's too much. So I don't know, maybe I can have one date in a month now.
But is everything okay? No one's ill, I hope?
No one's ill. How about with you?
Oh, it's fine. Fortunately, yeah, it's all fine.
So are you stuck at home?
Yes, we're all sitting at home.
And can you go out to go shopping and?
We can go out, but we can't go to theaters, cinemas, stuff like that.
We're all obsessed with Netflix now.
Yes, or books.
Or books.
Yeah, so I'm happy to say that Picture Me Gone is finally out in Russia and it's in our bookshops. And I have so much I wanted to discuss about this book with you because it's very, very personal for me. Not just because I translated it, but it hit me close to home, really close to home. And I wonder whether it's fair to say that it's your most personal book. Yeah?
Definitely. It definitely is. That's so interesting that it was very personal for you. Was it because that you had that kind of relationship with an adult or with a parent or?
Well, I feel very close to Mila herself and to her character, and I thought a lot about her. And I feel very close to the whole conflict of the book. A girl realizing that her parents are not ideal, not perfect.
Well, you know, I'm always trying to think about a different way to look at literature for so-called children, but I'm not sure I'm really writing for children. I feel sometimes I'm writing for 14, 15-year-olds, and then adults, and then people like me. But, you know, it's so lazy. People are so lazy the way they write about, let me just shut this down, sorry. They're so lazy so that they, you know, all the parents are either dead or terrible. and you know, the idea, and of course now I'm a parent, I have a 23-year-old now, but you know, the idea that you can be a bad parent without meaning to be a bad parent is something that I've been really interested in since I had my own child. And it's a different kind of bad parenting than we, you know, maybe than I grew up with. My father was working all the time. He was very difficult. My mother had her own problems, and, you know, but my husband and I are, you know, we're an artist and a writer, and you know, we're friends with my daughter. We have a really close relationship, but we have made, you know, we've lied to her. We've made mistakes without meaning to, particularly. So I was sort of interested in that, in going to a place that I thought people had sort of neglected a bit when they talked about relationships between children and parents.
And did you have anything similar with your parents?
No, not to Picture Me Gone, but I was the parent in Picture Me Gone. So when my daughter was 7, I had cancer, and she had already been to my youngest sister's funeral. But we, you know, we we were optimistic. I just had my first book out. I wasn't feeling very depressed, you know. So we didn't make a big fuss about it. We didn't, you know, talk about it with hushed tones. But what happened was that I looked perfectly fine, because you look perfectly fine. And then I discovered that I had a lump in my breast. And then from that moment, I went into hospital. I had 2 operations, and then I started having chemotherapy. And over the next 6 months, I looked sicker and sicker and sicker. But I wasn't sick from cancer. I was sick from treatment. And because we weren't really talking to my daughter about it all the time, we assumed she was okay because she acted okay. We kind of forgot to tell her that what was making me sick was the treatment.
So and she thought you were dying.
And she thought, I only realized it later. She thought that, like my sister, I was dying.
Yeah, that's awful.
It was awful. And she's still scarred now. She's
sure.
Still, and she, at the time she stopped sleeping, she became really very disturbed. And we were trying to be good parents. We were trying to do the right thing.
To protect her.
Yeah, to protect her, and just not to. But what I didn't realize was that when she went out with her friends parents would say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, your mother has cancer." So she wasn't getting that so much from us, but she was getting it out in the world. And after that, I started thinking about what happens when people lie to children. And I'm a fanatic about not lying to children. But sometimes you do it by mistake. And we did it by mistake.
And do you think it's partly a generational thing? Like, is it changing now a little bit? Because I think that now there is a trend in raising your kids among young parents to tell everything to your kids, to make them, it's good to make mistakes, to show them that you make mistakes and stuff like that.
Well, I did that, and my husband did that. You know, we're the generation, I mean, I'm 64 now, which to you seems really old, but we were the baby boomer generation, and we think of ourselves still as kids. You know, I still look around sometimes and think, oh gosh, I'm the youngest person in the room. And then when I really look carefully, I realize actually I'm the oldest person in the room, but I feel like the youngest person in the room. So we brought her up. She would say, you know, "Mommy, is there such a thing as God?" And I would say, "Look, your dad and I don't believe in God, but that doesn't mean you can't believe in God. You can believe in God. You know, nobody really knows." I mean, we were so ridiculously honest and liberal, you know. In fact, I was very upset. Well, I'm Jewish, but, you know, when it came to Christmas, you know, my husband was drawing hoof prints around the living room, and, you know, he was making, you know, we were leaving snacks for Father Christmas, you know, and I was like, you know, we can't do this. We're lying to her. She thinks there's a guy in a red suit flying around, you know, giving presents to everybody. But then we tell her, you know, no, we don't believe in God, but what, we believe in Santa Claus? I mean, you know, so we were trying to be honest, liberal, you know, but you kind of run into these problems. So I knew, like everybody said to me when I had cancer, you know, bring your child into the hospital so they can see where you are. But the problem is, when I was in the hospital, I was on a ward with people who were dying of cancer. And I didn't want her to see all these really sick people, because I thought, she'll think that's me. And I can't quite remember, but I wasn't really worried about dying of cancer. I don't know, I'm an optimist, you know. I figured I would have the treatment and I would be okay. But she didn't. She had no way of knowing.
Yes.
And I had no way. In retrospect, I had no way of knowing either, and only found out years later that they were much less certain that I would survive than I was. So
it's not really about lying, it's not about not telling something.
Well, exactly. And there are lots of different ways to lie, aren't there? You know, if you're in a relationship, you can lie by not discussing things. You know, you can pretend something doesn't exist. That's a kind of lie. You know, human beings do it all the time.
And Jill in the book doesn't exactly lie to Mila. He doesn't tell her something.
Yeah, yes, exactly. He thinks he's being a good father. And he loves his daughter, and it's a kind of, I think it's a little bit about the gap between children and adults, that adults often just can't see the world the way a child sees it, and therefore they make mistakes. And also, you can't not make mistakes in a relationship.
Oh, yeah.
You know, any relationship, you make mistakes, and you kind of depend on goodwill and on, you know, affection. And if the relationship is good, then it survives the mistakes. If the relationship is not so good, then it doesn't survive the mistakes. But with children, there sometimes are moments, and maybe you remember particularly the moments of feeling really betrayed by adults.
But for me, it was a really important moment when I realized that my parents were not perfect because of something they didn't tell me. And it was a really important moment of, you know, feeling, wow, I'm growing up. I'm an adult now when I realize they're not perfect. And I wonder whether, you know, a person who still idealizes their parents cannot be an adult.
That's such an interesting question. And yes, I think you're right. I think you're right. I mean, I had a conversation recently with a young-ish friend of mine. She's 29, and she told me, you know, very upset. And she told me, I've never said this to anyone before, but I found out my father had an affair when my mother was pregnant with me.
Wow.
And she was very upset about this. And, you know, it obviously was weighing very heavily on her. And I said, look, people have affairs. You know, it actually isn't anything for you, certainly, to feel ashamed about, to even, you know, even to blame your father for being a terrible person. People are weak, you know, they do things they regret. You know, I always say the reason most people don't have affairs is because nobody nice enough ever asks them. Well, me anyway. But you know, it's accepting in a way that yes, I think what you're saying is right, that realizing your parents are human, that they make mistakes as well, and that there's nothing so bad about making mistakes.
Yeah, nothing life-changing maybe.
Exactly. Life changes,
yeah.
and you know, sometimes the mistakes are really terrible. You know, sometimes, you know, you have a parent who's an alcoholic and who beats up your mother. I mean, that's a big mistake, you know, and you know, that's something that, you know, as a child is very, very difficult.
Yeah, but that's not the kind of mistake like we're talking about, probably. Exactly. Much bigger.
Exactly.
And I also about the character, the way she perceives stuff, and the way she feels what people feel and think. even when they don't understand it, the way she empathizes with people. And she herself compares herself to detectives and sleuths
Yes.
and dogs.
And dogs, yeah.
And I was thinking about other characters like that in literature, and they all seem to be detectives, like Poirot or Holmes. And I wonder whether it was necessary to put her in this detective, well, partly detective story to write her.
That's such an interesting question. Because I hadn't, you know, I'm not very good at plot generally. I don't think very much about plot, and I'm not sure I don't set out with an idea for a book or a plan for a book. A book sort of comes to me. And in fact, Mila sort of came to me at a time when I was watching Sherlock Holmes, the one with Benedict Cumberbatch. And I realized that there's something so fantastic about Sherlock Holmes, that he looks at a person and he said, oh, you had toast for breakfast and your mother has red hair and you're not really from England, you grew up in Hungary, you know, all those kind of being able to see those clues. And he's fictional, but there is a long spectrum of perceptiveness in people. So I remember once when I was still working in advertising, I went to a meeting. My partner and I were trying to get a job, and we went to an interview. And my partner was a big, boy from the north. They say in England, the north. That's all you have to say. Big, nice, ordinary, good guy. We went to this interview, and we came out, and he said, well, I think that was really good. I think that went really well. And I said, are you kidding? The atmosphere in there was so terrible. I didn't know what was happening. Found out later that day that the people who had interviewed us had just been fired themselves.
Oh my God. And you felt it.
I felt it, but he didn't. And he's not an idiot, but I am the kind, I'm a writer. I wasn't a writer then, but I'm the kind of person who walks into a room and feels an atmosphere. My daughter is exactly the same. And actually, if Mila is anybody, in a way, she's my daughter. And
I see.
a friend of mine wrote me an email after she read Picture Me Gone, and she said, this book is a love letter to your husband and your daughter.
Oh, wow.
And I hadn't quite realized it, but there's an element of other people too. There's an element of an ex-boyfriend of mine.
I was wondering how much it was you, but now you say that it's your daughter.
It's always me. It's always me to some extent. But my daughter, when she was younger, we always had a birthday party for her whole class. She went to a big, local school, and there were 25, 30 people in her class. And at the end of the party, we always had 9 identical school sweatshirts that people had left behind, because they all, they went off and they forgot their sweatshirts.
Yeah.
And my daughter, I would say, oh God, how are we going to get this back? And she would pick up a sweatshirt, sniff it.
Wow.
Really? She would say, this is Yasmin. This is Rebecca.
Oh my God.
This is, Sarah. And now I think she's probably lost that now, but she was like a dog. She could smell, I couldn't smell anything, but she could smell the individuals.
But it must be hard to be a mother of a daughter like that, because she knows everything about you.
She does know. That was also, yes, she was born like that. Yes. she was born like that, and she sometimes watches me, and she kind of sometimes, and she knows what I'm thinking. It is a bit terrifying, and it's hard for her because knowing what people are thinking, until you realize that it doesn't matter what people are thinking, can be an advantage, but it can also be a disadvantage.
In the book, it's also a burden for Mila when she says that people are so slow. It's so hard to be so fast thinking when people are so slow. It's the same with Poirot, who's always frustrated with people.
It's funny that you mentioned Poirot, because I've been listening to Poirot on the radio, because the BBC has these Poirot, and I find them now when things are very tense and life is difficult.
Comforting.
I find Poirot so soothing. Yes. But when it gets to the end, I was just listening to Murder on the Orient Express the other day, which is the big classic one. When he gets to the end and he makes a big explanation of how he knows everything, I still don't understand. Sometimes I go back and I listen again and I think, what's that? It's not the way my brain works at all.
Yeah, it's not. It's hard to be a detective story writer. Yeah, exactly. I think it's the hardest task.
Yeah, exactly. But there is something. Sometimes when I'm writing, I like to think about things that I love to read about or see, and one of them is the idea that there are people who know the answers. Can somehow, I think it's in Picture Me Gone that I talk about a constellation of facts, and most of us just see a whole mess of stars, but some people can pick up a bunch of facts, a bunch of things, like when she goes through the house and she sees a picture and some and she draws a conclusion without necessarily being aware that she's analyzing. It's just the way she sees the world. She sees the facts that other people miss.
Yeah, it's like just the perceptiveness. Yeah, it's in her nature.
Exactly.
Like the horse that you mentioned.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, clever Hans. Yes, that's right.
And it's also interesting how when she comes to America, she starts noticing all these little differences, like everyday differences between America and England. In How I Live Now, it's the same with the main character when she comes to England and she notices that everything is a bit strange and different. And so you seem to be fascinated with this idea of small differences.
Well, I've now spent pretty much half my life in England, and I grew up in America. So I moved here permanently when I was 32, and now I'm 64. So not only do you notice the differences, I mean, there are still, there's not even a language problem here really, but there are times when I can't remember the American word for something, or I can't remember the English word for something. And my books are first published and usually published simultaneously in America and England. And at the moment I'm writing a book set in New York City, and I have to really work to remember funny kinds of expressions that I realize that I've just absorbed living here, but that really don't exist in America. And sometimes you base a whole bit of dialogue around an expression, which
is awful for a translator. Please don't do that.
Exactly. I mean, I feel very sorry for translators who have to translate my books, because sometimes my American editor says, this word isn't American. And at the same time, my English editor says that word isn't English. And I realize sometimes I'm just mixing up language and making my own things. And, what translators do, I don't know.
It's especially hard when you write about the menu in the diner. and it should sound American, not just
That,
not
yes,
just
that's it.
English. Yeah,
Exactly. Exactly.
but your translators are very happy people, believe me.
Okay. I wrote one book. I wrote one book where I referred to, well, anyway, I referred to sex as squishy woo-woo. Now, squishy woo-woo doesn't exist. I mean, I just on the spur of the moment, I made it up, and I got a call from my German translator, and she said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, squishy, is kind of the noise.
Yeah.
Woo-woo is sort of what little children say, like, woo-woo, I can see your underpants.
Yeah.
So anyway, I drive her crazy, I think.
Are you friends with your translator, your German translator?
I was friends with her. I used to see her because I used to go to Germany a lot. So I got to know her quite well. And I got to know my Dutch translator very well. But I haven't been to Holland or to the Netherlands or to Germany lately. So I don't see them as much anymore. But
so I just wonder why you wanted to make Jill a translator.
Well,
it's such a perfect picture of a translator.
Is he? Oh, good. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
I'm slightly obsessed with translators. I think what they do is so undervalued and so difficult, and they often don't even, there's a movement now that the name of the translator should be on the cover of the book. There are a few awards now for the writer and the translator. But for a while I was winning a lot of literary prizes in Germany, and I thought, maybe my translator's a better writer than I am. I don't really know. But, the relationship that writers have with their translator, although it's very rarely, like this, I very rarely get to talk to my translator. But it's a very interdependent kind of relationship. I'm trusting you to sort of understand what's going on in my head. Otherwise, it's very difficult for you to translate the book. In the same way that I find it's very difficult to read a book where you just can't connect with the writer.
Yes, and it's difficult to translate if you don't feel that.
Yeah. So I feel that this probably, if I have a good translator, we will probably get along as people.
Yeah.
Because, if you understand the writing, then you probably understand the brain.
I see what you mean. I actually have a nerdy translator's question.
Oh yeah, please. Love nerdy translations.
So you name Mila, which is kind of a Slavic name in a way, and you name the dog Honey, which is Mila in Russian. Did you know that?
No, I didn't think of that.
It's just a coincidence.
That's just a coincidence.
That's amazing. I thought you'd know that because like honey is...
Well, miel in French. I speak some French.
No, not honey like the substance, but honey like deer.
Oh.
So the name of the dog would translate Mila because Mila means deer. Like lovely.
But not honey like you eat.
No.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah. So they're both like these, if I translated the name of the dog, they would be Honey and Honey.
How interesting. There's some really weird coincidences.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But, but now that I think of it, I mean, I don't know whether there is any miel, the French version of honey. Mila is quite close to that as well.
Yeah.
So maybe it all comes from some kind of a similar root, who knows? But,
yeah, but then why did you call her Mila? Why it's such
well,
a...
that is a really good story. And that really is something I call writer's magic, which is, you know, very woo-woo. If you, so I was supposed to be writing this new book, but I had no ideas. I had a new editor, and she kept calling me up and saying, "How's the book going?" And I kept saying, "Yeah, great. It's going really well." But I had nothing. I had literally nothing, not even nothing, not an idea, nothing. And finally, in order to get rid of her, I was writing a blog at the time. So I wrote a blog about how you name characters.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, for instance, the character in my new book is called Mila. And I wanted a name that sounded a little bit Eastern Europe, a little bit exotic, but not too exotic. You know, for me, I can feel when a name is right for a character. So I was writing about that. And then I sent the blog, and I thought, okay, I knew my editor read my blog. So she'll read this and she'll realize I have an actual character, so I must be writing
The name.
With a name, but I wasn't. And then another month went by, and another month went by, and I took my dogs to the park, as I often do, and a little Bedlington Terrier came running up to me. And my dogs are half Bedlington Terrier, so I quite like Bedlington Terrier. And this dog, there didn't seem to be an owner anywhere around. So I thought, it was on a big, you know, Hampstead Heath, a great big expanse. So I thought, oh God, maybe the dog is lost. So I went down and I looked at the tag on the collar to get the phone number. And the name of the dog was Mila.
Oh my God.
And so I kind of had that. So I went home that day after really such a long time of not writing, and I wrote the first sentence of the book. The first Mila was a dog, a Bedlington Terrier. It helps if you know these things. And then when I wrote that line, then the whole book started to come out of my head.
That's really magical.
It was magic. It was magic. And I, you know, when I tell this story, I have to say, I don't believe that there's a God of writing who gives me messages through a dog I meet in the park. But on the other hand, there, you know, as was it Hamlet says, there are more things on heaven and earth, you know, than we really understand. And, you know, is it a coincidence? I don't know. Do I believe in ghosts? I don't know. You know, if I see a ghost, then what am I going to do? Say, no, you don't exist?
Yeah, it seems that there's a lot of magic around the names in the book.
Yeah, I think there is. I think there's a lot of magic in writing, but I can't exactly explain it. You know, I'm not I'm not a particularly spiritual or a particularly superstitious person, but I do sort of believe in writer's magic, whatever that is. But that's fantastic about Mila and Honey. I mean, that's bizarre.
Yeah, that's a very strange coincidence. I didn't think it would be a coincidence. I thought you
gave me too much credit. So in the future, when scholars are writing about my books, they'll say,
yes,
carefully, you know, made this echo of the, you know, and I'm kind of like, duh.
Oh, it's so sad, but I'm afraid we'll have to stop here because we were asked to have just one half an hour.
Okay.
So, yeah, really grateful for your conversation and your books.
But it's really, really so lovely to see you. And do you have my email? Because
yes, I do.
Okay, if you ever have a question, you should definitely just email me. I love hearing from translators.
Oh, thank you so much. I will.
Okay.
I most definitely will.
I hope we meet sometime. I would so much love to come to Russia, and
there's so much snow here now. Yeah.
Yeah, we are waiting.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yes.
I'll be there. I promise.
So we'll be here waiting for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, and
Be talking to you.
take care.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.